So I saw this when I was browsing the old subreddit the other day. So shout out to this person. What was that? Second Mia. Shout out to them for posting this and highlighting it because I thought it was interesting. It's something that we've speculated about a good deal over time. Is there a Clancy era versus a Breach era? Are they two separate eras? And here it seems to call it the Clancy and Breach era. Not the Clancy and Breach eras, but the Clancy and Breach era. Which also, this and some other things that we'll see seems to confirm that they do very much think of the Breach Clancy combo as a double album. But we'll get into more of that later. But I just wanted to point this out in case you hadn't seen it. Kind of confirming that the Clancy and Breach era is all sort of one. Although in many ways, it is hard to not disconnect Clancy from Breach in some ways because we had a year of Clancy before we got Breach, or a year and a half of Clancy before we got Breach. Yeah, there's just a lot of really iconic moments in the Clancy era, like the Doubt demo, the line, things they did with the Clancy tour.
I do want to just start off with the elephant in the room. What will be public knowledge by the time this video reaches the airwaves is the show that is just announced in Columbus, your homecoming show, October 17th at the Shoe.
Anyone who's going to be at that show is going to kind of watch Josh and I probably, kind of realize over the course of the show that, we've reached that peak, and I'm not really sure exactly what sort of emotion it's going to be or how it's going to manifest itself, but it should be a pretty powerful moment.
I don't expect that they're necessarily going to make a concert film out of this like they did for the Mexico City performance. It wouldn't be surprising if they did, and certainly Mark has teased that they, if More Than We Ever Imagined it goes well, and it certainly seemed like the filmmaking process behind it went well, that they might come back and do more of these in the future, which would be awesome. Then if they do, this would be a prime, situation to do it. Regardless of whether or not there's a concert film, an official concert film, I'm hoping there will be some kind of footage from it, hopefully officially posted on their channel. So it's, high quality. Hope they can live stream it for the people who can't go. That would be really cool. I would buy a virtual ticket, to watch a live stream of it. If it was like an official live stream, obviously, that they were doing. I wouldn't pay as much as people who are going to see it, right? Like, I wouldn't want them to charge a couple $100, but $20 like they did for the live stream experience, I'd definitely do that. I not only want to see the set list for this and see what songs they're going to play, since he kind of has teased that there might be some different ones. But I also I'd be curious to see what it's like for them, as he kind of mentioned here, standing on that stage in such a big stadium, such a big arena, and performing to such a big crowd. I'm sure there'll be someone live streaming the show. It just might not be good quality.
I want to know if the shows you do in Ohio, if there's something different that you've noticed just throughout your whole time playing.
I guess there's just this extra sense of pride. Yes, from the audience being proud of us because, we're from Ohio and we still live here and we love where we're from. But also we have a sense of pride because it does seem like more recently our shows in Ohio have brought in a lot of people traveling in to see kind of the Ohio show, because we've always tried to make it special, add more to that show than any other show. And so I like the idea that people travel in and get to experience Ohio and kind of see it firsthand rather than, the way that maybe they hear it talked about. And I only mention that because it's a stadium and we're going to need to sell a lot of tickets, and I hope people come in from potentially more than just Ohio to come to the show. But
hope we sell tickets, brother. Do you know who you are? I mean, that's fair, but also this is the biggest place they've ever played. So I think it's fair to be like, well, we know we can sell out X amount of tickets, but this is however much larger, right? I think Mexico City was 65,000, and that was kind of a big deal for them, a milestone for them. So if they're then looking to sell 107,000, it's not twice as much, but it's significantly more.
With our listeners, we've asked them like over the years, if you ever met your favorite artist, what would you ask them? And I searched through and I found somebody who wanted to ask you a question, and I was wondering if I could ask. This is one of our listeners, Ashton, wanted to know.
I thought it was funny that the listener from Ohio who submitted a question about 21 Pilots at some point, not necessarily recently, is called Ashton. Fans of Jay will get the connection.
Was the approach to writing Breach different from Clancy, despite them being continuations of the same story?
So this is interesting. This is where we start to get to something I mentioned right at the beginning, sort of a further exploration of the idea of what is Breach in relation to Clancy and how does this Clancy Breach era work.
That time frame all kind of blurs together for me, honestly, as far as finding a rhythm and the way that Josh and I were writing, and the momentum that we kind of caught was continued from one record to the next. I personally, and I don't know if any, maybe some of our fans feel this as well. Sometimes I don't remember which song is on which record between Breach and Clancy.
I was trying to think. I don't know if I've ever mixed those up, but I may have for particular songs. I mean, I think it was something where, yes, it was only a year between Clancy and Breach, or a year and a half, but it was a packed year of The Line. There was the Doubt demo, and there was so much lore to unpack and dive into and speculate about that Breach, especially once Breach was announced, became this like thing to look forward to that would complete Clancy, but still very separate from Clancy in a lot of ways, even though it was very close. But it makes a lot of sense what he's saying, that from the writing perspective, and this is something that we've kind of speculated about, that Clancy and Breach were written almost simultaneously, like pretty close together, because they were touring for most of the time after Clancy came out. They didn't really have time to write an entire album for a lot of that. I'm sure they did some finishing touches here and there, but it really sounds like they were writing Clancy and Breach all together. And it reminds me of the early days of the band when, you know, they were writing a bunch of songs. This was before Josh even joined the original lineup. They were writing about a bunch of songs, and then they took some and put them together into what became the self-titled or 21 Pilots album, and then took the rest, the ones that didn't make it onto that album, and wrote a few more and created Regional at Best. But at least from a live perspective, they still had songs like Ode to Sleep, Holding On to You, Car Radio, things like that, that they were playing live, and Trees, for instance, that they were playing live during the so-called like self-titled era, if you can call it that, the 21 Pilots era, like after releasing and up to releasing that first album, even though that first album didn't include any of those songs. I just think it's interesting that they sort of wrote two albums simultaneously right at the beginning, and they sort of wrote two albums simultaneously here at the end as well. I think my common mix-ups are thinking Vignette is on Breach and thinking Raw Fear is on Clancy. That's fair. I can see Raw Fear being on Clancy and Vignette on Breach.
So in a sense, I kind of feel like their creative process were kind of together. They were raised by the same family, or, you know, whatever metaphor you would use. So yeah, very similar process. You know, Josh has a studio with his drums. We get all of our drums out of that. I have a studio where I do, you know, most of the writing and recording as well. And we collaborate and come together, and we worked with our producer friend Paul Meany on it. And so both of those things that I just listed were present in both records. And so I think that there is probably, if I were to really try to dissect the difference, maybe the mindset on Clancy was this like desire to prove something to ourselves, and then Clancy was written with more of a reassurance that our fans, we didn't have to, you know, prove something as much.
I assume he meant Breach there, not Clancy, but it's interesting. Like, Clancy in a lot of ways seemed to be saying a return to the lore isn't really accurate. Return to what they had been doing isn't really accurate, because they didn't fully depart from it in Scaled and Icy. But I think it was a return to a lot of things that they had done before the Scaled and Icy phenomena. And so I wonder if there was a sentiment going into creating Clancy and putting out Clancy of people didn't really vibe with Scaled and Icy the way we thought they would. It wasn't as well received as we wanted it to be. So are we coming into releasing Clancy, you know, worried about how people are going to receive this album? But then with Breach, everyone received Clancy really well. It did very well. And so with Breach, they were like, oh, okay, you know, our fan base still likes us. We, you know, still wants to hear our music, obviously. And so we can approach it slightly differently. I often wonder the order in which songs were made for Clancy and Breach. Yeah, I'd be curious to know that too. Sounds like Tyler might not even remember.
But also just kind of maintain the things that make us who we are, rather than...
Weren't some songs written just to make Breach a full album, like he was going to release it to Clancy Deluxe, but didn't like that idea. Yeah, so I mean, I think it was like Clancy and then an EP after Clancy, which they then abandoned and did Breach instead. And so I always speculate that there were like 5, maybe 6 songs on that original one, and then they added in a bunch of others to fill out Breach. So they did write some probably in like maybe the summer. Like, I don't know, they might have started trying to think about how to add some more starting in the summer after Clancy came out, maybe a little bit later. But they really didn't have a lot of time, right, to do this.
Sometimes as an artist, you feel pressure to completely reinvent your process or reinvent yourself. Yes, sometimes that's necessary, but I found that that's not always the healthiest progression for an artist or even a fan to experience as well. So trying to find that balance between doing something new, trying to keep it fresh, saying new things, but also not feeling like you want to only push off of who you were, but kind of being okay with who you were and being inspired by who you were. And so
this really seems to me like he's talking about sort of like I sort of alluded to, as a guess a second ago about Skilled and Icy, like wanting to return and push off from the way in which they were putting out and stylizing their music before Skilled and Icy, bringing back some of that same idea for Clancy and Breach, but not just copying what they were doing at the Trench and Blurry Face, but maybe not quite reinventing themselves so fully as they had experimented with in Skilled and Icy. But I don't know. I'm just speculating.
That's kind of how Breach was maybe written, with more of that mindset.
And that does make a lot of sense with regard to Breach in particular.